Hey guys, so we're going to be going over the few evolution topics we talked about this semester. So, most important is our natural selection and adaptation. So, in order for natural selection to occur, there needs to be a variation in traits. This is most important. And how adaptation occurs is the differential survival and reproduction. So basically, like here, this bird is eating all these green bugs, right? Because they can't camouflage as well. So the green bugs, if they get eaten, they can't reproduce. But the brown bugs can. So these brown bugs are now going to reproduce to make more brown bugs. And in order for something to occur by natural selection, the traits have to be heritable. Okay? So in our lab, when we did the investigation design, we talked about different adaptations that organisms can have to the environment, so that way they are better suited for it. And I'm not going to go over this in this video because I know you guys have a good handle of that by reading your investigation designs. But I am going to go over these few different types of selection that we see. So, diversifying or disruptive selection, I want you guys to think about our Darwin's finches when you hear this. So remember, that was where the birds with large beaks could eat the hard seeds. So large beak could eat the hard seeds that were big, and the small beak ones, they can eat the soft seeds. And because these are smaller, why would you want to spend more energy eating so many small seeds if you have the ability to eat these hard seeds, right? These hard, bigger seeds. So basically, this goes back to what we were talking about with our ecological niches, is these big beak and small beak finches, well, they're not competing with each other. So, because these traits are advantageous, when these birds are going to be able to reproduce because they survived, they didn't die of starvation like the medium-sized beaks did, like we had our medium, right? But they all died because they starved. So because these survived, they were then able to pass on their genes, which then caused for this shift in the phenotypes to where now you only get the small beaks and the large beaks and a very low frequency. So this is a low frequency of medium phenotype, right? So the other kind is stabilizing selection. So this is the opposite. This is where the advantageous phenotype is the medium one. Our example here is the human birth rate. So we don't want babies to be too small because then they're too preemie and they won't survive. And we don't want babies to be too big because there's a lot of risk with the labor and delivery part of having the baby. So we found that over time, our babies, they stabilize to be a certain size that is favorable to either be not too small, so that way they can still survive on their own, but yet not too big to avoid complications. Our last kind of selection that we can see is the directional selection. So our example here is antibiotic resistance. So say you get strep throat and you have a bacterial infection, right? Ew. Anyways, your doctor prescribes you antibiotics. Those bacteria that are not antibiotic resistant, so they don't have resistance, they're on the low side over here, right? They die. And those that are antibiotic resistant, they survive and they pass on their genes. So if they're resistant, they pass on resistant gene. So over time, the more you're exposed to this antibiotic, you're now killing off all these low antibiotic resistant bacteria, and you're just leaving the ones that are resistant, which causes the phenotype to now shift from the low to the high antibiotic resistance. So this is also what a lot of you guys saw on your investigation designs, this kind of selection. The last thing I want to go over is different mechanisms that we didn't really hit on in lab, but this is something that's important and is in your lab manual, so I suggest that if you need further clarification, you read this in your lab manual. But there are mechanisms that are pre-zygotic, so before fertilization occurs, and post-zygotic, so after fertilization occurs, that prevents other animals from other species that aren't the same from mating with each other. So the pre-zygotic ones would be some sort of physical barrier, physical, or more so something that's not a cellular cause. So this could be temporal, so they could meet at 2 different times a year. So this frog during the summer and this one during the winter. Or ecological. The lion and the tiger, they don't even live in the same area, so they can't interbreed. Maybe it's behavioral. A lot of birds, while they're similar looking, they actually have different mating rituals, so they wouldn't mate with each other. Or it's mechanical. Like these 2 dogs, they couldn't breed together because the parts just don't fit. And then we have our post-zygotic isolating mechanisms. So this is something that would be because of some sort of cellular or genetic cause. So we have hybrid inviability. So an example of this is hybrids are produced, but they fail to develop reproductive maturity. So for example, if 2 frogs of the different species were to mate and make this baby, this tadpole, it doesn't become a frog. It dies before it becomes one. Whereas then there's hybrid infertility, and this is the famous mule example. So this is where donkeys and horses can have a baby to make the mule, but the mule cannot produce viable gametes. Their gametes are sterile, so they cannot further make more mules. You can only make a mule by mating a horse and a donkey. Then you have your hybrid breakdown. So what this is where the hybrid between 2 different species, their first generation F1, those are going to be fertile, so they'll make an F2. But then the F2 generation then fails to develop properly, so it can't sustain a new hybrid species. They're only going to have at max 2 generations of this. But yeah, so this is a review of the natural selection adaptation, and then pre- and post-zygotic mechanisms to avoid interspecies breeding.